Hello friends and welcome to a lecture on physiology of flowering. The objectives of the present lecture are to explicate the possible physiological mechanisms of flowering, to understand the role of various environmental factors in regulating flowering, and to understand the involvement of plant growth regulators in promoting flowering. Flowering. The most colorful and spectacular aspects of plant growth is associated with the development of flowers and fruits. It marks a change from vegetative to reproductive growth in angiosperms. The process of flowering requires the vegetative meristem to change into a reproductive meristem. This process, which is termed floral evocation, involves a sequence of events that includes transition from juvenile vegetative phase to adult vegetative phase, adult reproductive phase, and finally flowering. This is particularly true in case of annuals, where floral initiation signals the end of leaf production and the beginning of chains that culminate in seed production and death of the plant. However, in perennials, floral initiation is not accompanied by such drastic changes as vegetative and reproductive growth go simultaneously. To a botanist, flowering is of interest as the means of sexual reproduction in higher plants, and to the rest of the mankind, flowering is of greatest practical importance since agriculture is based on the control of flowering and its resultant fruits and seeds. The maturation of the juvenile into an adult may be mediated by a variety of factors including size, age, leaf number, growth conditions, and other factors. Ultimately, one or more of these factors likely induce changes in hormones, nutrient levels, or other chemicals that in turn trigger the developmental switch to adulthood. The transition from the vegetative to reproductive buds is usually triggered by an environmental signal, typically photoperiod or temperature. Thus, this is a type of timing mechanism that plants use to coordinate actions with the season. If flowers are produced at the wrong time of the year, the pollinator may not be available, or it may be too dry or wet, or there may not be enough time before winter to allow time for successful seed set. However, in some plants, an environmental signal is not necessary to trigger the transition as the plants move directly in the reproductive phase after becoming competent. Now we will talk about pattern of flowering. A large number of plant species flower after some period of vegetative growth, irrespective of the season. But some plants flower only in a particular season of the year. Based on the duration by them to produce flowers, plants have been classified into annuals, biennials, and perennials. Annuals complete their vegetative growth and flowering in one season and then they die. Biennials produce vegetative growth in one season and flower in the next season. Perennials remain for many years and flower seasonally. In fact, some trees do not flower till they reach a certain age. For example, coconut and areca nut plants start producing flowers only when they reach an age of 6 to 8 years. On the other hand, in the case of bamboo plants, they grow for a number of years and flower only once in their lifespan. As soon as they flower, produce seeds, and plants die. That's monocarpic plants. Interestingly, there are many plants which flower throughout the year. For example, Catharanthus roseus. When flowering occurs strictly in response to internal developmental factors and does not depend on any particular environmental condition, it is referred to as autonomous regulation. Some plants exhibit an absolute requirement for the proper environmental cues in order to flower. This condition is termed as obligate or qualitative response to an environmental cue. In other plant species, flowering is promoted by certain environmental cues, but will eventually occur in the absence of such cues. This is called as facultative or quantitative response to an environmental cue. Now, dear students, we will talk about initiation of flower primordia. The initiation of flower primordia is a major event in the life cycle of a plant in that it involves a shift in the pattern of growth and development from vegetative to reproductive processes. In 1918, G. Klebs suggested that during its life cycle, a plant passes through several phases of development. Before floral primordia can be initiated, the plant must complete a period of vegetative growth or attain some minimal leaf number. When this condition is attained, the plant is said to be ripe to flower. Ripeness to flower is not recognizable by any external characteristic, but it can be determined empirically by subjecting plants of varying age to environmental conditions known to induce flowering. In most plants, ripeness to flower is attained after the plant has produced several leaves. In some cereal grasses, a minimum of 7 leaves must be developed before the plant is ripe to flower. On the other hand, a plant like Forbitis nil or Japanese morning glory is ripe to flower within a day after the cotyledons have emerged. Most common cultivated plants and weedy annuals, however, attain the ripe to flower condition 2 to 3 weeks after seedling emergence, when a few leaves have fully developed. Similarly, a tobacco plant flowers only after it produces about 41 nodes and about 37 leaves. Attainment of ripe to flower condition does not automatically lead to the initiation of floral primordia. Since the early work of Klebs, Gassner, and Garner and Allard, plant physiologists have carried out the detailed studies of the anatomical, chemical, and the biochemical processes that accompany the shift from vegetative to reproductive growth. The transition at the shoot apex from the juvenile to the adult phase has been found to be effective by transmissible factors from the rest of the plant. The apex receives a variety of hormonal and other factors from the rest of the plant in addition to carbohydrates and other nutrients. On the basis of extensive studies on tobacco, Carl McDaniel and his colleagues have defined 2 general categories of developmental states associated with floral evocation, that is, competent and determined. A cell or group of cells is said to be competent if it can respond in the expected manner when given the appropriate developmental signal. For example, if a vegetative shoot is grafted onto a flowering stalk, the scion flowers immediately. It is obviously capable of responding to the level of floral stimulus present in the stalk and is therefore competent. Failure of the scion to flower would indicate that the shoot apical meristem has not yet attained competence. In photoperiodic plants, the inductive photoperiod causes the leaves to export a floral stimulus to the rest of the plant that alters the developmental fate of the cells of the shoot apex. Once the meristem becomes committed to the new developmental program, that's flowering, it is said to be florally determined. The meristem is determined if it follows the same developmental program, even after being removed from its normal physical and environmental context. Now we will talk about flowering and photoperiodism. Flowering has been studied largely in plants in which it is controllable by environmental factors. Chief among such factors is the photoperiod or daily length of illumination. Photoperiodism has been variously defined as a response to the day length or daily duration of illumination, or as a response to the relative lengths of day and night, or light and darkness, or as a response to the night length or daily duration of darkness. A more general definition is that photoperiodism is a response to the duration and timing of the light and dark conditions. In fact, it is the time relations in which light and darkness succeed each other that appear to be crucial. On the basis of photoperiodism, plants have been grouped into various classes: short day plants, long day plants, day neutral or day length indifferent plants, short long and long short day plants, ambiphotoPeriodic plants, and the intermediate day plants. Now we will talk about short day plants. Flowering occurs only in short days, that is qualitative short day plants, or is accelerated by short days, that is quantitative short day plants. Flower initiation in short day plants is promoted by day lengths shorter than a particular value, the so-called critical day length, which differs widely from species to species. It is probably the night length that is the most critical factor in such plants. Hence, they are also known as long night plants. The examples of qualitative short day plants are Ambrosia artemisifolia, commonly known as ragweed; Chenopodium rubrum, commonly known as red goose foot; Chrysanthemum morifolium; Nicotiana tabacum, commonly known as tobacco; Forbitis nil, commonly known as Japanese morning glory. And the examples of quantitative short day plants are Cosmos bipinnatus, commonly known as cosmos; Gossypium hirsutum, commonly known as cotton. Now we will talk about long day plants. Flowering occurs only in long days, that is qualitative long day plants, or is accelerated by long days, that is quantitative long day plants. Flower initiation is promoted by day lengths longer than a particular value, the critical day length, which differs from species to species. Such plants are also known as short night plants. The examples of qualitative long day plants are Beta vulgaris, commonly known as beetroot; Hordeum vulgare, commonly known as barley; Hyoscyamus niger, commonly known as black henbane; Spinacia oleracea, commonly known as spinach. And the examples of quantitative long day plants are Lactuca sativa, commonly known as lettuce; Poa pratensis, commonly known as bluegrass; Ricinus communis, commonly known as castor bean. Let's talk about day neutral or day length indifferent plants. These plants simply flower after reaching certain age or size and apparently irrespective of day length. The examples of day neutral plants are Cucumis sativus, commonly known as cucumber; Impatiens, commonly known as balsam; Zea mays, commonly known as maize; Lycopersicum esculentum, commonly known as tomato. Now let's talk about short long and long short day plants. Flower initiation in a relatively few plants appear to be promoted by successive exposures to the kinds of conditions promoting it in an order depending upon the particular species. Each requirement in a given species may have its own critical day length. Such plants have been little studied but may be valuable in analyzing the photoperiodic mechanism. The examples of short long day plants are Secale cereal, commonly known as winter rye, Iberis durandi, commonly known as candy tuft, Triticum vulgare, commonly known as wheat, and the examples of long short day plants are Bryophyllum digrammontianum, commonly known as Bryophyllum, Cestrum nocturnum, commonly known as night blooming jasmine. Now we will talk about ambifotoperiodic plants. These plants flower only in long days or short days, but not at intermediate day lengths. And last is the intermediate day plants. These plants flower only between narrow day length limits. For example, one variety of sugarcane flowers only after exposure to day length between 12 and 14 hours. There are many species in which the photoperiodic response may change with age. Such changes are usually in the direction of day neutrality from an initial qualitative or quantitative long or short day response. A particularly clear example of this behavior is shown by a variety of sunflower, Helianthus annuus, in which young plants had a qualitative short day response with a critical day length between 12 and 16 hours, but older plants were either day neutral or showed a weak quantitative short day response. Photoperiodic stimulus is perceived by leaves. It has been experimentally demonstrated that the photoperiod experienced by the leaves determines the response at the apex in case of both short day plants and long day plants. Thus, in response to photoperiod, the leaf transmits an unknown signal that regulates the transition to flowering at the shoot apex. The photoperiod regulated processes that occur in the leaves resulting in the transmission of a floral stimulus to the shoot apex are referred to as photoperiodic induction. The nature of photoreceptors involved in the reception of light signals during the photoperiodic induction has been studied and found to be under the control of phytochrome. Phytochrome is a photoreceptor for red light response. In many short day plants, a night break becomes effective only when the supplied dose of light is sufficient to saturate the photoconversion of PR, that is physiologically inactive form of phytochrome that absorbs red light, to PFR, that is physiologically active form of phytochrome that absorbs far red light. A subsequent exposure to far red light, which photoconverts the pigment back to the physiologically inactive PR form, restores the flowering response. Red and far red reversibility has also been demonstrated in some long day plants, in which a night break of red light promoted flowering and a subsequent exposure to far red light prevented this response. In long day plants, the role of phytochrome is more complex, and a blue light photoreceptor also plays a role in controlling flowering. It has been hypothesized that plants measure the ratio of PFR is to PR. A long day plant would flower when the ratio is high, that is, more PFR, and a short day plant would flower when the ratio is low, that is more PR. Since PFR is labile and is broken down at night or reverts to PR. The longer the night, the lower the phytochrome PFR content. Dear friends, now we will talk about flowering and vernalization. Vernalization is the process whereby flowering is promoted by a cold treatment given to an imbibed or fully hydrated seed or to a growing plant. In other words, it is the process by which exposure to the cold of the winter renders plants competent to flower. Here, it is to be noted that dry seeds do not respond to the cold treatment. Vernalization requires exposure to prolonged cold. A vernalization requirement is often found in winter annuals and biennial plants that flower early in the spring. These plants typically become established in the fall, and a vernalization requirement ensures that premature flowering does not occur during the fall establishment phase. Without the cold treatment, vernalization requiring plants show delayed flowering or remain vegetative or grow as rosettes with no elongation of the stem. The effective temperature range for vernalization is from just below freezing point to about 10 degrees centigrades, with a broad optimum usually between 1 and 7 degrees centigrades. The effect of cold increases with the duration of the cold treatment until the response is saturated. Vernalization can be lost as a result of exposure to devernalizing conditions such as high temperature. The longer the exposure to low temperature, the more permanent the effect is. A chemical signal may be involved. The transmission of a signal through grafts has been noted, and the hormone has been termed vernalin, but not yet isolated. A vernalization requirement is often linked with a requirement for a particular photoperiod. The most common combination is a requirement for cold treatment followed by a requirement for long days, a combination that leads to flowering in early summer at high latitudes. Now we will talk about flowering and biochemical signaling. Many physiological experiments have demonstrated that inductive photoperiods are sensed by leaves. This raises two fundamental questions. How do leaves measure day length, and what is the nature of the flowering signal that must travel from the leaves to the shoot apical meristem? The biochemical signals that arrive from the leaves and other parts of the plant in response to photoperiodic stimuli may serve either as activators or as inhibitors of flowering. After years of investigation, no single substance has been identified as the universal floral stimulus, although certain hormones such as gibberellins and ethylene can induce flowering in some species. In the 1930s, the existence of a universal flowering hormone was postulated, and it was called florigen. Many attempts were made to isolate and characterize this hypothetical hormone, but nothing was identified. It has been suggested that gibberellins are probably one of the components of florigen, but the nature of other component is still a mystery. Brian and his colleagues came out with a working model to explain the action of photoperiods on flower-inducing substances. According to this model, during photoinductive red light treatment, a precursor gets converted to gibberellin or gibberellin-like substance. Similarly, flowering in pineapple, Ananas commosus, is promoted by ethylene or ethylene-releasing substance. The recent identification of flowering locus T as the gene expressed in leaves that encodes a phloem mobile messenger RNA or protein that fits the description of a universal flowering stimulus, florigen, has been an exciting development after the decades-long search for this elusive flowering signal. Flowering in Arabidopsis thaliana is regulated by 4 separate pathways. The photoperiodic long day pathway, which operates in the leaves, the convergent autonomous leaf number or vernalization low temperature pathway, the carbohydrate sucrose pathway, and the gibberellin pathway. Lastly, we will talk about molecular aspects of flowering. In 1991, Elliot Meyerowitz and Enrico Coin proposed a model called ABC model to explain how homeotic genes control floral organ identity. The model proposes that organ identity in each valve is determined by a unique combination of 3 organ identity genes. Activity of type A gene alone specifies sepals. Formation of petals require both A and B gene activities. Stamens are formed by a combination of activities of B and C genes, and the activity of C gene alone specifies carpels. The model further proposed that activities of A and C genes mutually repress each other, that is, both A and C type genes have cadastral function in addition to their function in determining floral organ identity. With that, I conclude today's lecture. Thank you.